police haven't told the full story. They'll tell you like, well, who told you to say Proud Boys? Everybody looks at each other. Well, I don't know. It's like the Spider-Man. You know what I'm saying? They're all pointing at each other. Chain of command.
Those are the words of Converge Media co-founder Omari Salisbury talking about the Proud Boy ruse used by Seattle police during the CHOP protests of 2020. There's a new policy on ruses issued this week by the city of Seattle. What impact will that policy have? Also, how much money is pouring into Seattle City Council races from independent expenditures? And how many amendments to the council's current mid-biennium budget package are going to squeak through? All this and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And my co-host is my friend and colleague, David Croman, transportation reporter for the Seattle Times. David, you're a new dad. I got to follow up on this. This week, we wrap up the month of October. I believe you found some newfound love for the holiday of Halloween. It gets a little different when you have a kid to dress up, I think.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of lost my interest in Halloween there for a while, but now that I have a child I can parade around, it's kind of fun again.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I'm going to say watch out on the candy, but you probably have that in the back of your mind already. It's the struggle is real there. So hang in there. David, thank you as always for joining me here. Thank you to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our patrons. Our patron shout out of the week to Arushi. Thank you for your support for the past 3+ years. Arushi, a proud member of the Mug Club, supporting the show at the $10 level. We sent her own Seattle News, Views, and Brews mug. Should we bring back that promotion? Let me hear from you, show supporters. Hit me back at Seattle News, Views, and Brews at gmail.com. Another note, if you want to see what this podcast looks like with the glitz and glamour of television, check it out on Converge Media. You can catch our show Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Converge. Thank you to Arushi. Thank you to all of our patrons. Your support keeps this show going. And speaking of getting going here, let's hit it. Time for Right Here, Right Now. David, we are so close to election time here, and I thought I'd jump into a story that always seems to rear its head at about this time of year, the amount of independent expenditure committee money that's rolling into the 7 city council races. The biggest headline for me so far is that this amount of spending has actually gone down, according to reports from the Washington Public Disclosure Commission. Remember 2019, more than $4 million was spent on the 7 city council races, with $1.5 million from Amazon alone. Well, this time around, it's about a quarter of that, about $1.1 million, nearly $900,000 of that coming from business interests, supporting more conservative or centrist candidates, roughly $200,000 from unions supporting more progressive candidates. Before we break down that split in spending between progressives and centrists, David, I guess I just wanted to ask, what does this lower overall amount of IEC spending say to you?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing it says to me is that the chamber and by association, Amazon are not really participating that much in independent expenditures. They, as you talked about, they got kind of burned on that in 2019, which I guess was the last time this many council members were up for election.
Right.
And, they dumped $1.5 million into the races at the last minute, and it kind of changed the whole narrative. Hard to know exactly how it changed the races, but there are plenty of folks out there who contend that kind of stole defeat from the jaws of victory for the kind of business side of the equation. I don't know if that's true for sure, but more broadly, I think after that happened, I had a lot of conversations with folks who were kind of just making the point that at a certain point when you are spending money in local races like this, money helps, but there is a ceiling at which money only goes so. I mean, you can only buy so many TV ads, you can only put out so many flyers. Right. At a certain point, people get turned off by being too flooded with messaging, and so I think it's a combination of things. But I do think to a certain extent, the difference between $2 million being spent and $4 million, I think you're not quite seeing as much benefit to those returns once you get above, spending $1 million or whatever on your preferred candidate.
Right. And you have to remember there's always the impact of the democracy vouchers here. Candidates can raise about $180,000 just going with public funds there. And they're a part of the conversation too, which is an important part of this. But I did want to ask that next question, that kind of breakdown of spending. More conservative or centrist IECs are outspending the progressive union-based IECs by more than a 4-to-1 margin there. what is that telling you? Is it the same story here of not wanting to flood the market? I just thought that was interesting. These progressive candidates, they want to get in office as much as anybody else. Why is the spending not commensurate with them as it is with these more business-related centrist candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been that. Not always,
Yeah.
but for the last few cycles, it's been that way. This year does seem to be tilted more heavily toward the business kind of
Yeah.
candidates. It you know, I haven't spent a lot of time with the graphs or whatever, but it does seem like the unions are not spending as much as they have
Right.
in past years. You know, I think
That's accurate.
Unite here, when last time Andrew Lewis was up, I think they dumped like $150,000, maybe more, into an independent expenditure campaign on his behalf. As far as I can tell, they haven't spent anything on him this year, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I don't really know. I haven't talked to the unions. I don't know why they're not as involved this year. Possibly just that there's a lot going on in the world of labor outside of elections. Maybe they're tied up. I don't know for sure. But then, yeah, I mean, I think for a few years now, the kind of business community has been motivated to flip the council, and they made progress doing that in the last election, but they haven't yet had that kind of overwhelming referendum that they have been hoping for. They really were hoping for in 2019 and completely failed.
Yeah.
And so I think some of what we're seeing is, you know, just people spending to try and create that reality.
Yeah.
I frankly, you know, we'll see, of course, on Tuesday.
Right.
It does seem like the spending this year has gone a little more under the radar, which I would imagine that people doing the spending are happy about. Again, when people are talking about too much about how much money you're spending, as we saw with Amazon, sometimes that can actually backfire on you. This year, you know, there just has, I think because it's a collection of a lot of different entities, not one big entity, it has flown under the radar a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to watch this, and that lower amount of dollars out there. There actually is not an IEC supporting Pete Hanning in District 6, and I'm not exactly sure why that's the case. There's a few different questions surrounding this and less money involved in this race, but I'm going to be very interested to see how this works, because I think it's very interesting to see how these dollars can impact the citywide races, but it really does feel like these district elections are a slightly different animal. So we'll follow up on the election results, of course, next week, and looking forward to seeing what happens there, because there's a lot ahead over this next week, and you'll be getting your mailboxes flooded, folks, if you live in Seattle, with more of this information from the IECs as we get closer to Election Day. All right, another big story emerging this week about the Seattle Police Department and how they use ruses, or methods of deliberately misleading the public out there. There's a new policy the mayor is talking about this week. He calls it the first of its kind in the country. Just some background here, folks. Police have used ruses for years. They are legal in some situations at a state level. The most high-profile recent example happened in Seattle in 2020, when officers said over the radio falsely that the Proud Boys were marching into the CHOP, the Capitol Hill organized protest there. That led to some protesters to arm themselves, a little bit of a panic, and later a call to action by Omari Salisbury and Converge Media, who said, what the heck's going on here? So now we have a new policy, 3 years in the making here, that says police cannot use ruses when broadcasting over the radio or any other mass media format. Officers are also now required to report when they use ruses, and they have to get approval from supervisors when using ruses, whenever that is practicable, as the ordinance says here. David, some thoughts about this new policy. For me, it's a little bit difficult to know how it's going to work until it's actually used by police. But just some basic thoughts on this ruse policy we have right now.
Yeah, I mean, there was the Proud Boy one, but then there was also the one where I might not get the details exactly right, but an officer told someone that they had like killed someone in a hit and run, I think. And
that was back in 2018. Exactly. Keep going.
Yeah. And then I think that person ended up, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that person ended up taking their own life. I mean, it was
attempting suicide. Yeah. That was a big issue.
Suicide. Yeah. So it was, I mean, that was, you know, the Proud Boy one, I think got a little more attention, but that other one to me is kind of more shocking. I mean, to tell somebody something like that when it's not true is quite traumatic. And so, you know, I always balk whenever there's hedging language, like when practical, and because that opens up the door to a lot of officers saying it just wasn't practical in that moment. I don't know how you prove practicality or not, but you know, I mean, at a time when there's just not like a lot of trust in the police department. We've seen that in polling. I think King 5 had polling that showed just a 33% approval rating of the Seattle Police Department. A lot of that stems from, I think a lot of that stems from people frustrated with slow response times, but also, there was the officer talking on camera about the young woman who was hit and killed and sort of making jokes about that. There was a stranger story about an officer who was using racial slurs against a Asian tenant of his. So, I just don't, there's a lot of feeling of disconnect between the police department and the community, and a feeling of, to a certain extent, a little bit of that they despise the city and the people in the city that they are policing. I think my colleague Danny Westney wrote about this a little bit. And so, if I'm the police department, I would be very careful when I'm deciding to intentionally lie to people in pursuit of something. And so I don't see this. If I'm the police department, I would be welcoming of this policy, because it's not, they are not in a super high leverage position to be using ruses to begin with right now.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And just a correction on that piece, I just looked it up to confirm what we were talking about. There was a person who was involved in a hit and run. The police officer said, hey, the person you hit's in critical condition, which was false. That person who was involved in the hit and run ended up taking his own life, and the family said that was a result of what they heard from police. So thank you for bringing up that back point there, David. But I think you bring up another really good point here in terms of what the police should be espousing here, and the silence was really deafening from the Seattle Police Officers Guild here, the main union that actually runs the, they're the rank and file there for Seattle police officers out there in our city. They really haven't said anything about this policy. And while I would understand that it might take a, quote, tool out of their tool belt in terms of things they can use to solve cases or whatever else, the fact that we haven't heard from SPOG on this, I think that speaks volumes. I don't know exactly how this whole deal was brokered, but I think this feels like something officers are being told to do rather than something they might fully be on board with. And I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. SPOG likes to be kind of a fire tosser, bomb thrower. Yeah. They're usually not shy about saying what they think, especially under Mike Solon. That said, it is a politically tricky thing to say. We want to be able to lie to you.
Right. I see what you're saying.
With impunity. And so, maybe that's a lack of a statement would be as much of an endorsement as you're ever going to get from the Seattle Police Officers Guild. When restricting what they can do. So, if I'm one of the people pushing this policy and support this policy, I would welcome the Seattle Police Officers Guild not saying anything about it.
Fair. Yeah, this is a touchy issue that has taken 3 years to develop, any sort of policy at all. So we'll see how it plays out. And again, the real test of it, we won't know for some time, perhaps until the next mass protest in Seattle. So a lot happening here, a lot dependent on officers self-reporting this when it happens. So there's a lot to this. The policy is one piece, but the enacting of it is certainly another. All right, well, that rumbling sound you're hearing from the second floor of Seattle City Hall downtown means a lot of hemming and hawing over budget amendments. We're going to have some details coming up on Now Hear This. Well, it is another week without a full council meeting for the city of Seattle as council members work out their amendments to the mid-biennial budget. How is that process going? Well, I asked that question of Councilmember Teresa Mosqueda, the council's budget chair, last week on Council Edition on the Seattle channel. She says her balancing package was an attempt to respond to some recent public input.
Because of that, we were able to add some additional enhancements for refugee and immigrant services. We were able to add additional support for food assistance security. And we are continuing to work with our community to identify other ways to support renters, something that we also heard in public hearing that evening.
Councilmember Mosqueda there referring to an October 18th public hearing. Remember, folks, your last chance to offer some input is at a public hearing on Monday, November 13th at 5 p.m. We'll see what happens there. And I want to put this in perspective, David. This is a mid-biennium budget process we're talking about. The main 2-year budget was passed last year. So last year, we were talking about 195 amendments for the council to consider. This year, it's 53. But, David, I did want to touch on a few here, including one from Councilmember Strauss that I think intersects with your work as a transportation reporter. So Strauss wants to divert $1 million in sales tax funds. Some of those funds are going up. So he says, all right, some extra money. Let's put it into a transit ambassador program for King County Metro. This is a pilot program. It's in effect right now. There's a small team of bus drivers helping out with wayfinding at busy areas like Jackson Street, Renton Transit Center. Strauss actually wants these folks on buses to try to put some extra eyes there. Not exactly a security group, but hopefully something that makes riders feel more safe. I just wanted your thoughts on this, David. What do you think of this move? Looks like a one-time funding plan, which always gives me pause, but just this thought about adding to the transportation ambassadors.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of, I think in the metro or the transit world, there's a sense that people are maybe not returning to transit as much because they don't know what to expect. They have some ideas about it being, service being poor, but also, some safety issues, lack of reliability.
We had that big deal on all the fentanyl found on the surfaces and so forth. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think what we're seeing, from this money, but also just at, in a lot of transit agencies, kind of experimentation in some ways with, how do we make transit kind of more welcoming to people, get people back into the habit of using transit and know what's, because sometimes it's as simple as like someone's route has changed since before. Maybe you haven't ridden the bus since before the pandemic. You want to get back on the bus, but your route maybe looks a little bit different than it used to. That kind of thing I think is maybe a little intimidating to people. So, these kind of ambassador programs is, like you said, it's not security exactly. I mean, they do have security still out there or King County sheriff's officers, but it does create sort of a front-facing presence that used to be held by maybe law enforcement or security officers and now is held by people who are not that. So, I think the effort is kind of an attempt at making like a overall better sense of well-being while being on transit. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I think the transit agencies don't know if it's going to work or not. Similar to what Sound Transit has done with its fare ambassadors. Those of course actually check fares. I don't think these metro ones would do that, but the idea is, if you have a question, you have somebody you can go up to and ask who is not a police officer, and answer your questions or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they're kind of a quasi-security piece here. Certainly something that might make people feel safer riding on buses. Also in the transportation world, just ticking down some of the different amendments that council members are considering. No amendment for the streetcar connector program, as we've talked about before. That's interesting. Plus, Councilmember Peterson is pushing for another $3 million in bridge maintenance. Good luck with that. And a move to expand internet access for everybody in the city, just to kind of give you some of the hits, runs, and errors here. But I did want to look at one more closely here, one more amendment here, David. I was interested to see Councilmember Herbold's efforts to get more funding for LEAD, formerly known as Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. Now, Let Everyone Achieve with Dignity is the acronym. This is the pre-arrest diversion program used in our region. This amendment I'm talking about has no money attached to it, but it's a request to the Human Services Department to develop an approach to scale up funding for LEAD and find a way to integrate LEAD data with city data. The need for more LEAD services was noted in the Public Drug Use and Drug Possession Law the council recently passed. That's Ordinance 128696, if you're keeping score at home. And David, I just wanted to dive into this for a couple reasons. I'm really interested to learn how much scaling up LEAD really needs. I think it's a lot. And also, who's really running this agency? Is the city trying to take control of it? Are they going to be working with the county? I just wanted to talk about the future of LEAD and how important that is to this whole idea of having this drug enforcement piece in place for the city of Seattle.
Yeah. LEAD, I mean, it feels like LEAD comes up in every budget cycle.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's more about money. It seems like this one is not about that as much. I mean, I think to a certain extent there was, so many conversations for so long about, alternatives to policing. How can we kind of reduce, how can we take on some of what are basically societal challenges like homelessness or addiction or mental health, and move them away from police, because police don't really want to do it. And there's not a lot of people out there who argue that police are the best people to do it. Yep. And so, there was kind of talk about setting up alternative systems. I think what we've seen maybe recently, and there's some dovetailing with the new drug law, is perhaps a realization that, like, hey, maybe it's not about setting up something totally new, but using what we already have, which LEAD has been around since, well, I don't remember the exact year,
2011,
maybe.
I think,
It's been around
is when it was a pilot.
2011.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a while. It has, the thing that I think is also appealing about LEAD is it is not a sort of defund the police organization. The people who work there oftentimes praise their partnerships with police. I think it used to be much more dependent on police than it is now.
Yeah.
There's a lot more community referrals rather than law enforcement referrals. But I think what's appealing about it is the central message is that, which isn't an anti-police message. It's we can do better with police, as partners, but without police as being the kind of main support for a lot of these people. And I think at a time when the city council is at once not as bullish on defund the police as it maybe was in 2020, but also not totally willing to back off looking for alternatives, that's a kind of appealing option, which is a program that uses police as they are right now, but is not a police agency, and has a track record to a certain extent of dealing with some of the tougher people in the county.
Interesting. And I'm very interested to see when that data comes in, what it shows. I know some critics of LEAD had said, what exactly are your success rates and how are we measuring them and things of this nature? So a lot still ahead with LEAD. That's a part of the budget here. And again, if you'd like to sound off about it, that last public hearing is coming up on November 13th. So make your voice heard there. David, I am very much looking forward to your next installment in the saga of the Washington State ferry system, which we will touch on in just a little bit. But I did want to touch on another interesting transportation headline from your colleague, Mike Lindblom of the Times. Apparently, Sound Transit needs some more rail cars very soon, or it might run out of space for riders in a couple of years. They're looking for 10 cars at a cost of $100 million, up to $100 million. And they're saying the window to put this order is basically coming up now due to supply chain issues. David, your take on this? I know some Sound Transit board members are saying, whoa, this is happening too quick. But apparently this is something Sound Transit really needs.
Yeah, I find it's pretty fascinating because there's the supply chain question, which is, as we all know, you can't just sort of order complicated machinery these days. There's backups and things take a really long time. But also to a certain extent, it's a reflection of, less frequent service, which I don't think is super encouraging to a lot of transit advocates. That right now the answer to that is maybe sometimes you get a 3-car train, sometimes you get a 4-car train. But if the trains aren't coming all the time, then eventually as Sound Transit expands to Linwood and the east side, then those trains are going to become a lot more crowded. But if they're not coming often enough, then the thought is, well, we have to cram more onto each train. So that's where the need for more cars comes. In general, the system is going to need a lot more cars just to expand service. I think they have like 150 in waiting already, but their projections for how you kind of ease the pressure on the crowding that inevitably comes if you're not sending a train every 8 minutes or whatever. If that wait time is 15 minutes, each train is going to get more crowded, and so you will need more cars on it. Government agencies, government boards never like to be told that they have to make a decision about something that they right now and quickly. There was some frustration from Claudia Balducci in particular that basically they're receiving a PowerPoint briefing on this and not much more, and are being asked to approve $100 million purchase. I would guess that purchase ends up happening, but you could sense the frustration on some board members' parts.
Agreed. And talk about an agency that's going through some frustration here and needing to buy some more infrastructure. A near breaking point issue for the Seattle ferry system, already stretched thin. David's got the story coming up on Transportation Talk. David, let's talk about your latest piece in the Seattle Times to outline what's happening with our ferry system. Another boat is out of service, meaning now a full third of the fleet, we're talking 7 out of the 21 boats, are not available. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. We don't write about every breakdown, because if we did that, we would be writing about breakdowns
every day,
several times a week. This one felt worth it, though, because the breakdown is significant. The Chimicum threw a rod, as it was described to me. I'm not a mechanic, but I think basically one of the drive shaft rods broke, which is probably going to mean you need to rebuild that whole engine. So that's pretty significant. So it's going to be out for a little while, but more so it's the marker of where the fleet is at. To have just 14 boats available is really bad. I mean, it's fortunate. The only silver lining is that it's October, or basically November, and it's not August. This would be a lot worse at peak season. But still, I mean, it means that you have reduced service on, I think it's 3 routes now. I mean, you've had reduced service on the triangle route to Vashon and Fauntleroy, and reduced service on Bremerton, and now you have only 1 boat on Edmonds Kingston. So that none of that is good. But when you're left with so few boats, compounding that is you have smaller boats than you would probably want on some of these routes. So you've got the Salish out there, which only holds 64 cars on routes that usually have boats that hold more than 200 cars. So that means not only is service not coming as often, but they're overflowing a lot faster. It's pretty dire because, as we've talked about a bunch of times and I've written about a bunch of times, there's just no real hope on the horizon until at least 2027, but probably 2028, maybe 2029, when we finally will start getting new boats. And so it's unlike maybe some of the crew shortages where you have hope that you can hire more people in the short term. This is like guaranteed a 4-year problem before you finally start getting new boats. And so it's just kind of white knuckling it until then.
Right. Yeah. That building of new boats is taking a long time. I remember you talking about the deal that looked like it was in place with Vigor, but maybe it's not in terms of building those new boats. There's this big push, I know, for the hybrid boats to involve more electric energy that the governor's very excited about. But you're right. We're talking about a situation right now where they simply don't have the craft. And that silver lining of, hey, we don't have a lot of crews. So that, I wonder about that piece of it. They certainly don't have enough boats right now. And I appreciate your reporting on it. But I did need to wrap up with you here, David, and maybe as an addendum, I suppose, to what you've been talking about with the ferries. There's been a lot of talk about ad space on the ferries. There were some Coke ads painted on the Tacoma that had some people saying, no, you're defacing an icon. Then you've got other people saying, hey, we put ads on the sides of buses. Why not? Those ads are on hold right now because of all this public furor over this. What's your position on these ads? Should ferry boats have ads painted on them? What do you think?
Well, the ferries have had ads on the inside often, and you maybe hear a little bit of grumbling about that, but no one has really raised their hackles over it. The Coke ads were different because I think people just have this affinity for every national sporting event has some sweeping shot of the green and white ships coming and going from the harbor. And so to have this like bright red on the outside, I think is more of a shock to the senses than just having ads on it. And so it just sounds like the ferry department got slammed with complaints about this. My hunch is the complaint that really maybe put it over the top is that Governor Inslee said he was, quote, surprised that there were not any regulations around the aesthetic of putting ads on the outside. So it wasn't so much like Coca-Cola, but just that he thought it was kind of ugly. And so, I think this will be the last time for a while that we will see outside ads, because also it just doesn't bring in that much money for what the ferry system needs. So
I was going to say that's a big piece of it.
I think their calculation was, look, we need a lot more than a Coke ad's worth of help here. So let's take this down and focus on the bigger battles.
Yeah, right. Yeah, $250,000 for the Coke ad. That sounds great, but you need $4 million to try to buy one of the new boats here. So, and you know what?
$100 million.
Oh, excuse me. That's right. Excuse me. That's you got the number correct there. Thank you for correcting me on that one. And you know what? The governor's probably a Pepsi guy anyway. I mean, let's just get right down with it.
Yeah.
David, thank you, as always, for joining me here. And thanks to everyone listening in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, folks. Really need you to show your support and keep this show going. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.